The explosion was a physical thing. One moment, Nathaniel Harrove was a doctor bandaging a miner's finger. The next, the world tore itself apart. The roar of the mountain collapsing swallowed every scream. Lanterns danced like frantic ghosts. Men dropped their tools and ran for their lives. "Get out!" Nathaniel screamed, his medical kit forgotten. He grabbed a limping man and dragged him toward the main shaft. He'd known the Silver Creek mine was a death trap. Every creaking beam, every shower of rock was a warning. Warnings he had written in his reports. Warnings the mine owner, Harrison Caldwell, had paid him to soften. "Just small omissions," Caldwell had said. "Nothing to worry about." The second explosion threw him from his feet. Pain bloomed across his face as something heavy struck him. The world went dark. He woke up to the taste of blood and coal dust. The mine had partially collapsed, but he was alive, trapped in a pocket of air with the groans of the dying. Men were trapped deeper in. The whole mountain was groaning, ready to finish the job. But Nathaniel was a doctor. He organized the survivors, his training taking over. He didn't stop until they stumbled out into the harsh, unforgiving sun. A crowd was waiting, wives, children, their faces twisted from hope to horror. And then he saw them. His wife, Eleanor, his daughter, Grace, running toward him against the tide of bleeding men. Eleanor's face was a mask of pure terror. "Nathaniel!" she screamed. He tried to wave, to tell her he was okay, to tell her to stay back. But before he could find his voice, the mountain took one last deep breath. The silence was absolute. Then it exhaled fire and rock. The third explosion was the end of everything. The mine entrance vanished in a rolling cloud of dust. Where his wife and daughter had been standing, there was nothing, just a wall of death. He fought the men who held him back, a wild animal caught in a trap. But his strength was gone. As the darkness took him again, his last thought was a bitter one. He had failed them. He had taken the money. He had softened the reports. And now his family was buried under a mountain of his lies. 6 years later, the buck moved through the snow. Its breath was a ghost in the cold. The crack of the rifle was the only sound in a world of white. The animal dropped. Nathaniel Harrove lowered his Winchester. The ache in his hands was an old friend. Winter always made it worse. The scar on his face pulled his mouth into a permanent grimace. Another souvenir from that day. His hands, once steady enough to pull bullets from a soldier's body, were now just tools. Good enough to hunt. Good enough to survive. He approached the deer and murmured his thanks to the spirits. 6 years alone in the Colorado mountains had taught him things his Presbyterian father would have called blasphemy. The snow was deep. It was a long, hard drag back to his cabin. Darkness was falling when he finally saw the smoke rising from his chimney. He froze. He hadn't left a fire burning. He slipped the rifle from his shoulder. You don't live 6 years as a ghost in these mountains without learning caution. Footprints led to his door. Small, not a man's. And there was blood. Dark spots on the clean, white snow. He was 10 yards away when the door creaked open. A young woman stood there, her dark hair a storm in the wind. She was a Native American, her heritage written in her high cheekbones and copper skin. Her eyes went from his face to the rifle in his hands. "Please," she said, "my grandmother is dying." Nathaniel didn't move. "We saw the smoke," she said, her voice desperate. "We've been traveling for days." "Who's we?" he asked, his own voice a rough, unused thing. "My grandmother and I. She is very ill, please." The wind cut through them. The woman shivered. Nathaniel had spent 6 years building walls around his heart. Every human connection was a wound waiting to happen. But the doctor inside him, the man he thought he'd buried, wouldn't let him turn away. "Step aside," he said. Inside, an old woman lay on his bed, her breathing a ragged, painful sound. Her face was a map of a long, hard life. "I am Kimimela," the young woman said. "This is Makawi." The old woman's eyes opened. They fixed on his face, on his scar. But she didn't flinch. She looked at him with a strange, unsettling focus, as if she were seeing something behind his eyes. "What's wrong with her?" he asked. "Fever, a cough. She grows weaker every day." It was pneumonia. The journey through the storm would have been a death sentence. He went to the old trunk where he kept the remnants of his former life. He pulled out a bottle of willow bark extract. Boil water, he told Kimimela. As she moved to the fire, the old woman's hand shot out. Her grip was like iron on his wrist. The healer has wounds of his own, she whispered, her voice like dry leaves. Nathaniel tensed. Rest. Her grip tightened. We did not come here by chance, Nathaniel Harrove. The sound of his own name hit him like a physical blow. How do you know who I am? The old woman smiled, a secret smile. The spirits guided us. Your wife. Don't, he growled, pulling his arm away. Don't speak of her. The dead do not leave us, Makawi murmured, her eyes closing. Not when there are words still unspoken. Nathaniel turned away, his heart a hammer in his chest. He stepped outside into the falling snow, needing the cold to clear his head. As he dragged the deer to the smokehouse, he felt it, the weight of eyes watching him from the dark ridgeline. He was a man who lived with ghosts, but he had the terrible feeling he was about to meet some new ones. The night was long. Nathaniel sat by the fire, his rifle across his knees. Every sound from the forest was a threat. On his bed, the young woman, Kimimela, stirred in her sleep. She was fighting her own ghosts. Hollis, she whispered. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He didn't know the name, but he knew the fear in her voice. Just before dawn, the cabin door creaked. It wasn't the wind. He was on his feet in an instant, moving with a predator's silence. He didn't call out. He didn't wait. When a shadow stepped over his threshold, Nathaniel brought the heavy iron fire poker down with all his strength. The man hit the floor with a wet, ugly sound. From the bed, Kimimela gasped. Her eyes met his across the dim room. She was terrified, but there was something else in her gaze. Trust. She was trusting him to be the monster she needed him to be. He tied the man up and dragged him outside. The man spat blood on the clean snow. Hollis wants the girl back, he rasped. She's property. Nathaniel didn't answer. He just drove his fist into the man's face, hard enough to shatter his arrogant grin. He barred the cabin door from the outside, wedging a chair under the knob. He left an old whistle on the table beside Kimimela. If she needed help, she was to blow it until her lungs gave out. Then he threw the prisoner onto his horse and rode for town. The sheriff in Silver Creek was a man named Burke, a man who had gone to seed, his ambition replaced by whiskey and laziness. He looked at the prisoner on his floor and shrugged. Fine, Burke said. Let him cool off in a cell. But Nathaniel saw the lie in the sheriff's eyes. This wasn't justice, it was a delay. The man would be free by noon. As he was leaving, he saw another man in the office, a man who didn't belong. He wore a long coat, and on his vest was the star of a U.S. Marshal. His name was Isaac Reed. The Marshal listened to Nathaniel's story, his eyes sharp. When Nathaniel mentioned the name Hollis Crane, Reed's expression hardened. He'd been hunting Hollis for months, for kidnapping, for murder, and now he had a witness. Back at the cabin, the fear in Kimimela's eyes had been replaced by a cold, hard fire. She told him everything, about Hollis's hidden camp, about the brand on his horses, about the other men who worked for him, and then she told him something that changed everything. The man he'd captured, the one with the scarred cheek, wasn't just some thug. He was Sheriff Burke's cousin. The law in Silver Creek wasn't just lazy, it was compromised. Nathaniel felt a cold dread crawl up his spine. He hadn't just brought a fox to the hen house, he had delivered it to the other foxes and told them exactly where the chickens were hiding. He led the wolves right to her door. He walked to the old wooden chest at the foot of his bed, the one he hadn't opened in 6 years. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was his past, a Colt peacemaker and a gun belt, heavy with ammunition. Kimimela watched him, her eyes wide. What are you doing? He strapped the belt around his waist. The weight of it was familiar and terrifying. Getting ready, he said, because the law ain't coming, so we're going to have to be the law. But a new horrifying thought was taking root in his mind. Why would a U.S. Marshal be hunting a simple ranch hand? Why would a sheriff risk his career to protect him? This wasn't just about a kidnapped girl. He turned to Kimimela. Is there anything else you need to tell me? She looked away, pulling the coat tighter around her. And for the first time since he'd found her, she looked guilty. No, she whispered, but it was a lie. He could hear it in her voice. And Nathaniel Harov realized, with a certainty that chilled him to his soul, that he was fighting for a stranger with secrets. And secrets in this land had a way of getting people killed. The quiet between them was a heavy thing. He knew she was lying. She knew he knew. Marshal Reed rode out to the cabin the next day. He didn't waste time. "Burke let him go," Reed said, his voice flat, "just like I knew he would." The marshal spread a worn map on the table. "Hollis isn't just a kidnapper, Nathaniel. He's running a whole network. Stolen goods, illegal whiskey, and people. He uses them as forced labor on remote ranches where no one will ever find them. He's been doing it for years." "Because the local law is in his pocket," Nathaniel stated. "Exactly," Reed said. "That's why I'm here. This is federal business. But I can't move on him without proof. I need a witness who will testify. A witness like Kimamela." The marshal turned his gaze to her. "But Hollis knows she's a loose end. He won't just try to get her back. He'll try to silence her. Permanently." The plan he proposed was insane. He wanted to use Nathaniel's ranch as a trap. "He already thinks she's here," Reed argued. "We can be waiting for him." Nathaniel's jaw was a hard line. "You want to use my home as a battlefield? You want to use her as bait?" "I want to use the truth as bait," Reed corrected him. "It's the only way to stop him. Otherwise, you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, and she'll spend the rest of hers running." That night, Nathaniel explained the plan to Kimamela. "Do I, do I have to stand out there?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Like a lamb tied to a post?" He put a hand on her shoulder. "No," he said firmly. "You stay inside. You stay behind me. Always." At dawn, the ranch looked peaceful, but it was a lie. Marshal Reed and two deputies were hidden in the hayloft of the barn, rifles ready. Nathaniel stood by the fence, pretending to mend a post. The Colt on his hip was a cold, heavy weight. Inside the cabin, Kimamela watched through a crack in the wall. The waiting was a special kind of hell. Then she heard it, hoofbeats, a cloud of dust on the horizon. It was them. Hollis Crane rode in first, an arrogant grin plastered on his face. He swung off his horse. "Calder!" he called out. "I hear you found something of mine." Nathaniel straightened up slowly. "She's not yours," he said, his voice a river stone. "She's free." The standoff stretched. Hollis's hand hovered over his pistol. Then, Marshal Reed stepped out of the barn. The sun glinted off the star on his chest. "Hollis Crane," Reed's voice boomed. "You're under arrest." The game was over, but Hollis Crane just laughed. A short, ugly bark. He spat on the dirt, and then he reached for his gun. A shot rang out, but it wasn't from Hollis. It was from the hayloft. A warning shot that kicked up dust at Hollis's feet. Hollis froze. He looked from Nathaniel's cold eyes to the rifle barrels in the hayloft, to the star on Reed's chest. He was caught, outnumbered, outgunned. The fight went out of him. The deputies moved in, cuffing his hands behind his back. His men wisely dropped their guns. It was over without a single drop of blood. Nathaniel stepped back inside the cabin. He unbuckled the gun belt and laid it on the table. And for the first time since Kimamela had met him, he smiled. "It's over," he told her. "You're safe now. You are free." But as he said the words, he saw that flicker of guilt in her eyes again. The trap had worked. Hollis was caught. So why did he have the sinking feeling that this was just the beginning? The trial was swift. With Kimamela's testimony, Hollis Crane and his whole crew were sentenced to prison. Even Sheriff Burke was forced to resign in disgrace. Back at the ranch, a new quiet settled in. But it wasn't an empty quiet anymore. It was filled with Kimamela's presence, the sound of her laughter. One evening, as the sun set fire to the sky, she looked up at him. "Eli," she said, "why? Why didn't you just ride on by?" He leaned against a fence post. He could have given her a simple answer. But it was more than that. "Because a man has two choices in this life," he said. "You can turn your back on someone else's pain, or you can help carry them through it. I spent 6 years turning my back. I guess I was just tired of walking away." Her eyes filled with tears, not of fear, but of hope, and something that looked a lot like love. But their peace was a fragile thing. A few days later, a letter arrived. It was from a powerful railroad company. It was an eviction notice. It claimed his land, the land his family had worked for generations, was being seized for a new rail line. It said his deed was invalid. He had 30 days to leave. It was a lie, a threat. And then it hit him. The missing piece of the puzzle. Hollis wasn't just kidnapping people. He was clearing the land. He was the muscle for the railroad, forcing small ranchers off their property with violence so the company could buy it for pennies. They hadn't just defeated a man. They had angered an empire. And the empire was striking back. The eviction notice was a declaration of war. That night, Kimimela came to him. She was holding a small leather-bound book. "I didn't tell you everything, Nathaniel," she whispered. "Hollis, he couldn't read or write. He made me keep his records." He took the book. He opened it. It was all there. A meticulous record of horror. Payments from shell corporations owned by the railroad. Names of ranchers who were targeted. Bribes paid to local officials, even Sheriff Burke. And one name, over and over again, under executive payments. A man named Silas Thorne, a titan of the railroad, a philanthropist back east, a ghost out here on the frontier, pulling the strings of his murderous puppet. "This is why they want you silenced," Nathaniel said. "It isn't just your testimony, it's this book." This was no longer about a legal eviction. This was about survival. Silas Thorne wouldn't send lawyers next time. He would send killers. That very night, they got their proof. A fire started in the barn. It wasn't lightning. Nathaniel smelled the kerosene before he saw the flames. They fought the blaze, but it was a message. "We know you have the book." As he stood there covered in soot, he knew their time was over. They couldn't stay. They were sitting ducks. "We have to run, Nathaniel," Kimimela choked out. "We take the book to Marshal Reed." But he shook his head. "Reed is one man against an army. They'll bury him in paperwork while their assassins hunt us down. Thorne is too powerful. The law can't touch him." "Then what do we do?" she cried. "We can't win their fight," he said, his eyes glinting with a cold, dangerous fire. "So we're going to make them fight ours." He went back into the cabin and pulled the old Colt from its holster. He took the ledger and wrapped it in oilcloth. They rode out under the cover of smoke and a rising storm, leaving the smoldering barn behind. They didn't ride for town. They rode for the high country, for the jagged, unforgiving mountains where the law didn't exist. Silas Thorne wanted his land? Fine. He could have it. But Nathaniel Harrove was about to show him what the land could do to men who didn't respect it. The mountains became their fortress, a world of rock and pine where a man could become a ghost. Nathaniel knew these trails. He taught Kimimela how to track, how to move without a sound. The broken girl he'd found on the prairie was hardening into a survivor. He led them to a narrow canyon called the Devil's Jaw. One way in, one way out. A perfect place to make a stand. A week later they came. 5 men, led by a killer with a long scar down his cheek. They moved with the confidence of predators. "Stay here," Nathaniel told Kimimela, tapping the saddlebag with the ledger. "No matter what." He didn't meet them head on. He used the mountain as a weapon. He started a rock slide, spooking their horses. He became a phantom in the rocks, his rifle shots echoing through the canyon until it sounded like there were 10 of him. He wasn't shooting to kill. He was shooting to terrify. He was dismantling their confidence piece by piece. For 2 days, the cat-and-mouse game continued. The hired guns, city killers out of their element, started to break. Finally, only the leader with the scar was left. He screamed into the canyon, his voice raw with fury. "Calder, Thorne just wants the book. Give it to us, and he'll let you walk away." Nathaniel appeared on a ledge 100 feet above him. "Thorne doesn't get to make deals for my life," he yelled back. "You tell him this land is not for sale, and neither am I." He fired a single shot into the rock above the man's head. It was a final warning. The scarred man fled. Nathaniel had won the battle, but he had embarrassed a powerful man. And a man like Silas Thorne would never forgive that. He wouldn't send 5 men next time. He would send an army. When he got back to their hidden camp, Kimimela was waiting, holding his rifle. "We can't stay here forever, Nathaniel," she said. "Hiding isn't winning. We have to take the fight to him. She was right. But how? Every lawman was likely on Thorne's payroll. There's only one person we can trust, Nathaniel said. Marshal Reed. He's a federal marshal. He doesn't answer to Thorne. If we can get this ledger to him, he can start a fire that even Thorne can't put out. The problem was, they had no idea where Reed was. Finding him meant leaving the safety of the mountains and walking right back into the lion's den. But they had no choice. They had to stop running from the storm. They had to become the storm. They returned to town as ghosts, moving through the back alleys under the cover of darkness. The town was different, tense. Armed men, Thorne's men, stood on every corner. It was an occupation. They found a room in a boarding house and watched the telegraph office. It was their only hope of finding Marshal Reed. One afternoon, Kimimela stiffened. Nathaniel, look. Across the street, talking to two of Thorne's thugs, was former Sheriff Burke. He wasn't in disgrace. He was laughing. He was still on the payroll. Then a stagecoach pulled up. A man in a fine city suit stepped out. Burke immediately became subservient. It was one of Thorne's lieutenants from back east. Nathaniel knew he had to get closer. He slipped into the saloon where they were meeting and hid in a dark corner. The man from the east was furious. Mr. Thorne is not pleased, Burke, he hissed. We need that ledger, and we need Calder and the girl dealt with. Permanently. Then he said the words that turned Nathaniel's blood to ice. We've been tracking Reed's telegrams. We know his next destination. A mining town in Colorado called Silver Creek. We're sending a team ahead. He's going to have an accident. They were going to assassinate a U.S. Marshal. He had to warn Reed. But as he backed away, a floorboard creaked. The man in the suit snapped his head around, his eyes locking on Nathaniel's hiding place. Who's there? Burke and the others turned, their hands dropping to their guns. Nathaniel was trapped. He kicked over a table, using it for cover as bullets splintered the wood. He fired back, not at the men, but at the rows of whiskey bottles behind the bar. Glass and liquor rained down. In the chaos, he bolted for the back door. He got to the boarding house just as they were kicking in the door to their room. He and Kimimela scrambled out a window, across the rooftops, and dropped into an alley 2 blocks away. They made it to the livery stable and rode out of town, not toward the open prairie but north, toward the train tracks. A freight train, heading for Colorado. It was their only chance. As they rode through the darkness, a new terrible thought hit him. How were they tracking Reed's telegrams? There could only be one answer. They had a traitor inside the Marshal Service. They weren't just racing against assassins, they were racing against a ghost, and they had no idea who it was. The freight train was a long, dark serpent in the night. They ran alongside the slow-moving cars, and Nathaniel hoisted Kimimela up into an open boxcar. He swung up after her just as the train picked up speed. They were fugitives, heading straight into the heart of the storm. During the long, rattling journey, the rest of Kimimela's story came out. Her father, a surveyor, had discovered Thorne's land-grabbing scheme. Hollis and his men came in the night and made it look like an accident, a fire. She was spared only because Hollis could use her. She became his prisoner, his bookkeeper, forced to document the very crimes that destroyed her family. Running wasn't just about saving myself, she confessed, her voice thick with shame. It was about finding a way to burn them all to the ground. They arrived in Silver Creek in a freezing rain. It was a raw, chaotic mining town, a sea of mud and desperation. The perfect place for assassins to blend in. They found a corner in the busiest saloon, the gilded cage scanning the faces. And then Nathaniel saw him, at a poker table in the back, the man with the long, pale scar, the leader from the Devil's Jaw. He wasn't alone. 4 other killers sat with him. They weren't playing cards, they were waiting. Thorne hadn't just sent a new team. He'd sent the same men Nathaniel had already humiliated. This wasn't business anymore. It was personal. They slipped out. They knew Reed would head for the sheriff's or the assayer's office. They split up to watch both. Hours passed. Then just at dusk, Nathaniel saw him, Marshal Reed, dismounting in front of the assayer's office. Before Nathaniel could move, 2 of the assassins detached from the shadows and followed Reed inside. The trap was about to be sprung. Nathaniel needed a diversion. He ran to the end of the street, to a massive freight wagon loaded with barrels parked on an incline. He pulled the chalk from under its wheels. The heavy wagon rumbled down the muddy street, crashing into the saloon's hitching posts with the sound of a thunderclap. Barrels bounced across the boardwalk, scattering panicked miners. As the assassins at the saloon rushed out, Nathaniel sprinted for the assayer's office. He burst in, his Colt in his hand. Reed was at the counter, his back to the door. The two killers were closing in, their own guns half drawn. "Reed!" Nathaniel yelled. The marshal spun. The gunfight was over in seconds. When the smoke cleared, the two assassins were on the floor. "Calder, what in God's name is going on?" Reed demanded. "Thorne sent them to kill you," Nathaniel said. "There are more of them." Just then, Kimamela ran in. "They're coming!" The sounds of shouting filled the street. They were trapped. "The back door," Reed commanded. "There are mining tunnels under this town." They burst out the back, plunging into the darkness of a narrow tunnel. Behind them, they could hear the scarred man shouting orders. The hunt had gone underground. The tunnels were a labyrinth. They ran, guided by Reed's flickering lantern. The shouts of their pursuers echoed all around them. And then, the lantern died. They were plunged into absolute, terrifying darkness. A beam of light cut through the blackness ahead, pinning them. "There they are!" a voice shouted. A gun fired, the bullet screaming off the rock wall. They were caught. But then, another gunshot rang out from a side tunnel. Not at them. At the man with the lantern. The lantern shattered. A figure stepped out, a pistol in each hand. It was one of the assassins. But he wasn't looking at them. He was looking at the scarred man. "Thorne pays well," the man said, "but the U.S. government pays better, and it offers a pardon." It was an ambush within an ambush. Reed had turned one of Thorne's own men. The tunnel erupted in a nightmare of muzzle flashes. Reed and Nathaniel joined the fray. When it was over, a ringing silence descended. The scarred man lay dead on the tunnel floor. "I knew they were coming for me," Reed said. "My source in the telegraph office is a double agent. He's been feeding me their plans, too." He took the ledger from Kimamela. "My God, Calder. This is it. This is a warrant for Silas Thorne himself." They had won. But as they climbed a ventilation shaft toward the old church on the hill, Nathaniel couldn't shake a feeling of unease. It was too neat. A man like Thorne would have a backup plan. When they pushed open the grate into the cold night air, they saw what it was. The church wasn't empty. Standing there in the moonlight was former Sheriff Burke, and he had a dozen men with him, all armed with rifles. They were surrounded. "Did you really think it would be that easy, Marshal?" Burke sneered. "Mr. Thorne sends his regards. He'd like his book back." The double agent hadn't just been playing Thorne. He'd been playing them all. He'd led them into the final, perfect trap. Burke's grin widened. "It's over, Calder. Give me the ledger, and I might let the girl live." Marshal Reed took a step forward. "Burke, don't be a fool. You're aiding in the attempted murder of a federal officer." "I'm not planning on coming back," Burke spat. "Now the book." But Kimimala was no longer the broken girl from the prairie. She stepped forward, her voice ringing out in the cold night. "You want the book, Burke? You'll have to kill me to get it." It was a hopeless final stand. But then a new sound rose from the town below. The sound of shouting, the sound of running feet, and the unmistakable glint of torchlight. A river of fire flowing up the hill. The miners. The chaos in town had ignited a spark. The miners had seen federal lawmen fighting hired guns in their streets. They had chosen a side. Burke's face went from smug to terrified as 100 furious men crested the hill, armed with pickaxes and hunting rifles. His men hesitated, then threw down their guns and ran, melting into the night. Leaving Burke alone, he stood there stunned as the miners surrounded him. He turned, his face a mask of hate, and raised his pistol, aiming it straight at Kimamela. "If I'm going down," he snarled, "I'm taking her with me." A single gunshot cracked the night. Burke staggered, a look of surprise on his face, and collapsed. Standing at the edge of the crowd, smoke curling from his pistol, was the turned assassin. He gave Reed a grim nod, then vanished. It was finally over. In the weeks that followed, the Ledger started a fire that Silas Thorne could not put out. His empire of corruption came crashing down. The eviction notice on Nathaniel's ranch was nullified. The valley was safe. Marshall Reed offered Kimimala a new name, a new life in the Witness Protection Program. She stood with Nathaniel on the porch of his rebuilt cabin. The wildflowers she had planted were beginning to sprout. "Are you going to take it?" Nathaniel asked, his voice quiet. She was silent for a long time. Then she took his hand. "My name is Kimimala," she said, "and my life is here, with you." He turned to look at her. The love in her eyes was a fierce, unwavering thing, forged in fire and rebellion. He squeezed her hand, a small, tired smile touching his lips. "Good," he said, "because I was tired of being alone." The Wild West wasn't just about outlaws. It was about ordinary people pushed to do extraordinary things. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, one single act of defiance can change everything. What would you have done if you were Nathaniel? Would you have taken that risk for a stranger? If this story moved you, hit that like button. And if you want more tales of courage and justice from the forgotten corners of history, make sure you subscribe. Your support is what keeps these stories alive.